going on, everyone? Welcome back to the Cashed Out Podcast. I'm your host, Silas, and excited to be on here today. Definitely pumped. I'm consistent today. This is I guess it'll be the second week in a row that I actually get the podcast done in time, which is a win for me. I'll take the small wins all day. So definitely excited about what's going on so far. The weather here in Ohio is finally feeling like springtime, and I'm absolutely loving it. I'm not a winter person. I'm not a winter person at all. I don't like freezing. I don't like being cold. I remember one day we went to, not one day, I think it was a trip. It was a weekend. It was a week trip. So we went out to Colorado, ended up in Denver, Colorado, and we went actually, so this was a surprise thing. One of my best friends really, he's an adventurous kind of guy, super fun. He's the one that kind of pulls me out of my comfort zone and stretches me to do the things that I may not enjoy at the moment, but looking back, it's like awesome memories. And I'm just like, you know what? I'm glad we did that. But going back to it, so we were in Denver, we were in Colorado, and my friend had connections with one of his buddies who was a search and rescue guy, and he actually took us snowshoeing, and we're actually hiking, snowshoeing up. I think we went from like either 10,000 feet elevation to like 12,000. We may have been at like 13 or something like that, but it was really high, drastic change. It went from like 50 to 60 degree weather when we were getting down to the campsite, all the way up down to like, it was like 30 or 40 degrees as we got up the hike. So we hiked up this hill, hiked up all the way to the top of the hill, and there was actually like a glacier at the top of the hill. But along our journey, on the way up to the top of the hill, this big gust of wind just came out of nowhere. And mind you, I was not ready to go snowshoeing. I was like, I am not prepared for this. I got like a rental winter coat that's too big for me. Like everything was it just wasn't the right fit. So I was not covered, like my face was exposed. And when this wind gust hit, my buddy actually has this on video, and I literally just turn around and I'm like cringing. I'm like feeling every bit of that wind. And he's got the video going, and he's like, isn't this awesome? And I'm like, I'm like having the worst time of my life. So the hike up the hill was not good, and it was mainly just because I wasn't ready for it. But the cold weather did not help. It was cool getting up there, up top, and actually getting to see the frozen glacier. We actually took some pictures on there, and I actually need to dig those up. I actually have those on my camera from a few years ago. Such a cool experience looking back on it. In retrospect, cool experience. But that kind of like cold weather stuff is not for me. I am not a cold weather adventure person. I am more of a spring and fall person. And that's kind of what we're starting to get now. Is actually, I finally got the polo on, the loose, got shorts on. Just more comfortable weather. It's probably about in the 70s here in Cincinnati area. So definitely loving this. I am absolutely loving the nice mild spring temperatures as we're getting into the warmer seasons here, as opposed to the frigid winter that we had. And honestly, I don't think the winter was as bad here in Cincinnati. Other places have it worse. You know, some of our friends in Minnesota, God bless you if you live up in Minnesota. That is not my kind of weather at all. I think they're still frozen right now, but some people have had it worse. But it's just good to be in spring. Spring is one of my favorite seasons. Spring and fall. I could live with spring and fall if you give me those two seasons, and then just get rid of the rest of them. I don't care about I don't care about summer, and I don't care about winter. Spring and fall are money because they're beautiful for photography, they're beautiful for video, they're comfortable, and they're just awesome. So definitely loving the weather. Things are starting to warm up nicely. I'm excited about that. And actually, it's really cool. I was just talking about, kind of joking a little bit about getting the podcast done in time. But this is something that I'm constantly working on in every area of my life, is just continuing to be more consistent. Because I've noticed that whenever I'm consistent with the podcast, it also helps me be consistent with the main channel. And my goal is to be able to have the main channel and the podcast feed each other, because there's sometimes some stuff that I tap into while we're doing the podcast, and I'm like, oh man, this would be a really good video for the main channel, or vice versa. There'll be some stuff that I'll talk about on the main channel, and I'll be like, oh man, I really want to get into this a little bit more. But there's obviously a different flow, different structure between the two. So staying consistent and making sure that I'm regularly putting this out, regularly recording, and regularly actually making the time. So life is busy. Obviously, we run a media production business, so we do photography, videography, and we've got retainer clients, we've got new clients, we've got weddings, we've got a lot of stuff going on. So it is easy to not be able to have the time to do the podcast or to have the time to do the channels on to the videos on the main channel. But we always make time for our priorities. So it's just a matter of figuring out how to make time, how to be able to carve out that 30 minutes, carve out that hour, whatever it may be, to be able to help me better prepare or help me better organize my time so that I'm able to do these more regularly. And I'm definitely excited. Off to a good start so far, right? 2 weeks in a row, loving that. But hopefully we'll keep it a little bit more consistent there. But definitely excited about the show today. Got a couple topics, a couple things that I wanted to dive into, and just a few things that I've noticed and seen here. But I was actually, as I was looking around, I stumbled upon a video. I forgot which channel it was originally, but I ended up watching like 2 or 3 videos about cinema lenses. And with the Lumix S5ii, the cinema lens options with the L mount has really kind of piqued my curiosity. Now, I've always been fascinated with cinema lenses, and that's something that I guess just comes from being a movie buff. You know, I love watching movies. Like that was my go-to thing to do when I was single. Before I got married, my wife isn't that much of a movie person. It's so funny. When we started dating, we were talking about, like, what do you like to do and whatever. And the first thing she said was that, don't take me out to a movie. I was like, what are you talking about? And to me, I'm like, this is blasphemous, right? I'm a movie buff. I love movie. I love film. I love, for me, I kind of nerd out because really good cinematography, really good storytelling just captures me, right? It obviously captures everybody else, but I feel like I really nerd out in terms of like camera angles, lighting, those kind of things. So that's why I really love watching movies, is really to help sharpen my eye too. But she is not a movie person at all. So she literally will fall asleep. Like we rented out, gosh, I forgot what movie it was, but the first time I actually got her to sit down and watch a movie, it was at our friend's house. That's right. It was at our friend's house, and it was like kind of late night, maybe like 9, 10 o'clock, not super late, but later on in the evening. And we're all sit down in the basement, got the lights down, we're watching this movie, and I look over to her, and she is just sawing logs, knocked out, just sleeping like crazy. And I'm like, man, like really you're gonna do this right now? You're gonna sleep during a movie? But I've come to learn that for her, it's really just finding the right movie. So I have to, one movie that she was actually able to stay awake and really be engaged in was was it 1917? I keep wanting to say 1971, but 1917. And that movie is awesome. Like the one shot, the way the story was told, like everything about it really just captured her. And it was really cool getting to talk to her, because we actually got to sit down, watch the movie together, and then talk about like the behind the scenes. We actually watched the behind the scenes stuff, and I was kind of nerding out a little bit, but it was cool that she was engaged in the movie enough to stick around. And we probably watched the behind the scenes stuff for like 20-30 minutes, which is really awesome. So those are the kind of movies that I've learned that I can have my wife sit with me through. But going back to what I was talking about earlier, cinema lenses have always just fascinated me, because it's kind of like that whole idea of going from like the minor leagues to the pros in terms of equipment, right? In terms of seeing like, hey, am I able to handle the same type of equipment and same kind of tools that these big production places are using? Now, I'm not talking about like the $10,000 or $20,000 lenses. Absolutely not right now. Or I don't know. Maybe down the road, if we, ever need it, but that's not something that I'm appealing to. I was really kind of looking when I was watching that YouTube video. It was just talking about, I think it was like 7 Artisans. It was the brand of the lenses, and they were more budget friendly. I think they were like $300 to $400 per lens. So a whole kit, a whole set of those. I think it was a 35, a 50, an 85 millimeter lens kit. I think that's what it was. But the whole set was like $1,000, right? I mean, with the lenses that I'm using right now, the 24 to 70 S Pro version for Lumix, that alone was like $1,300. So I'm like, okay, I could get a whole set of these for about the same cost as a lens, a camera lens, a photo lens, and be able to actually play around with these and get a feel for it. Now, I'm very fascinated about that. It's still just a thought. I don't think I'm going to do it like right now, but it's something that is really gotten on my radar. It wasn't, but it's gotten on my radar once I saw these videos, and I was like, man, because I've always thought about the potential. I've actually saw Armando, I forgot the Mondo Bites. He's a YouTuber, does film and video, and he actually did a short film using the Lumix S5ii, and he had like the cinema lenses, he had the rig set up and all that stuff, and I was just like fascinated by it. I was like, that looks really cool. I wouldn't mind doing something like that. So maybe down the road, once things settle down, once things aren't a little bit crazy and I've got a little bit more time to experiment, I'll be able to play around with the cinema lenses. But just something that caught my attention. I hadn't heard of 7 Artisans. I mean, from the looks of it, people have had videos for years reviewing their products, so I'm just kind of late to the late to the party here, apparently. But that'll be very interesting. And the other thing that I saw too, I noticed that black and white photography apparently is making a comeback, right? So it seems like the Leica and Pentax were the brands that I saw that had or were developing. I think Leica has already released one or a couple cameras that shoot in black and white, which is very interesting to me because it's one of those cases where I know obviously black and white photography, it doesn't really, to me, I wouldn't buy a camera just to shoot black and white. I feel like, I don't know, I'm not that engaged or that interested in shooting black and white to do that. I would just, use my Lumix S5 and just shoot and turn that into black and white. But from what they're saying, from what I was reading in terms of the reviews and some of the things they're talking about with this camera, is that apparently it's a little bit sharper. The processing is a little different. I don't know all the technical details on it, but apparently it's better processing for black and white photography. So it'll look better as opposed to taking a color photo and turning it into black and white, which to me, I'm like, I don't know how much better that's going to be, but I don't think it's like $2,000 worth of better for me to shoot in black and white. But it's just fascinating to see. It's almost like the old stuff is making a return. And, like they all talk about like all the retro stuff is going to be cool. Just give it like 5 or 10 years. It seems like we're really hitting that like in different areas. So, I mean, obviously black and white photography, it's got its benefits. If you were shooting black and white, obviously composition becomes important as opposed to just saying, oh, look at the colors. It's more so the colors are almost like removed from the equation, right? So you go from having the colors being something that you can lean on in the photo, to have the photo pop or stand out, to being now everything is solely focused on like the composition, the lighting, all the fundamentals of photography, which that aspect of it is pretty dope. It's really cool. I would not mind I wouldn't mind shooting a black and white camera just for the sake of sharpening my skills in the areas of like composition, lighting, those kind of things. But just to do it, like I wouldn't obviously pay for a black and white camera. I would probably just, try and do it on my own. But that was just a fascinating thing. I was just kind of scrolling through some of the news feeds, and that's one that kept popping up. I saw obviously the Leica camera. I think that's already been out. I could be wrong, but that seems like that's already been out. And then the Pentax one, which I didn't even know. I kind of didn't realize. And I don't obviously pay attention to a ton of the smaller camera brands. I didn't realize they were still in business. So Pentax is still alive and kicking, apparently. That's pretty interesting there. So the other story I wanted to hit on is Sony screwing the A7S III users. Now, I'm going to take a quick water break here. So hold, please. All right, I'm back to it. So Sony screwing the A7S III users. This is an interesting story because it's kind of talks to the whole idea of brand loyalty. And if you don't know, if you're not like a big into like the Sony cameras, I'm sure most of you listening to this are already engaged in the photography and videography world, so this won't be news to you. But A7S III, I mean, literally just came out a few years ago. It's like the flagship, well, not really the flagship camera, I guess. I guess the A1 is Sony's flagship camera, but the A7S III is just loaded. Like it's loaded with almost every feature that you can think of for videography. You've got it on there. I mean, it's got IBIS. It's got the low light capability. I think 12,800 ISO is one of the high end native ISO. The S-Log. The freaking thing is amazing. And I was looking at the A7S III when it came out, just to see what it had to offer, because I kept seeing all the videos, all the people putting out videos saying like, oh man, it's the best camera I've seen, blah 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 blah. And looking at the footage, looking at the specs, looking at everything that it offered, I mean, it's like it almost lacked in nothing. Like, that thing was just incredible. But I mean, now that's been a few years ago, right? I mean, the camera itself, I was looking on Amazon actually earlier today. So brand new is right now, it's running retail for $3,500 body only, and then used you can get it for like $3,300. So very fascinating. What's happened is that Sony released the FX3 and the FX30 and also the ZVE1. And essentially, all of these new camera bodies have all been updated. I've gotten the latest firmware updates. It looks like Sony is pushing these newer ones, but it's not really supporting the A7S III because there hasn't been a recent firmware update for the A7S III. Now, that's something that for me, if I was an A7S III user, and a lot of them just kind of seeing the sentiment out there right now, a lot of people are not happy about that. Because it's a case where you guys have spent $3,500, almost $4,000 on a camera body, and it's got the features, but it looks like Sony is essentially leaving you high and dry and not giving you the firmware updates and the pieces that they're releasing out to the newer cameras. So it's like they took your money, right? They got your money, but I don't think they're in it for the long-term relationship. Now, I'm just saying this from what we know right now. As of now, I could be wrong, but I haven't seen any news from Sony saying that they're going to release any new firmware updates for the A7S III. If they do, awesome, then this is all just irrelevant. But as of now, there hasn't been newer firmware updates for it. So it's almost like the A7S III users are just left high and dry, which is very frustrating because as creatives, we have such loyalty. And I feel like it's more so out of familiarity and comfort with the tool, but we tend to become very brand loyal. Like, so you notice through conversation, if you come across another photographer, videographer, whoever, and you talk to them, almost immediately the first thing that comes into it is like, oh, what do you shoot, right? What brand do you shoot? And for the most part, most people are kind of tied to a particular line of camera, and that brand loyalty, we commit so much to the brand, so much money, so much like mental energy in some cases, with people that are doing content about the brands, about the different the lenses, the different cameras, whatever it may be. We commit so much to the brand because we like the tool, we like the camera, we like the lenses. We get familiar with it, and we stay loyal to these brands, but the brands themselves don't necessarily stay loyal to us. And coming from, when you guys have heard it over the past few videos, past couple podcasts, my transition over from Canon to Lumix, and during that time, I was with Canon, and I've talked about my story. I was with Canon, and it was out of necessity initially that I left my Lumix camera and went to Canon because I was doing more video, and the autofocus with Canon was good at the time, and it was better than what Lumix had to offer at the time. So stuck with Canon, but over time, as I did more with the Canon camera, as I shot more photos, shot more videos, I really became loyal to Canon. And I think I maybe throughout I would say, I don't know how many years I shot Canon, but throughout all the years that I shot with Canon, I bought third-party glass maybe once. I had a Sigma lens. I had a Sigma 24-70 lens, and that was like the only third-party lens that I bought. Everything that I got was basically Canon. And for me, I loved the colors. I loved how it performed. I loved what it produced. But I kind of was getting into that mode where I was brand loyal to Canon. I wouldn't look at Sony. I wouldn't look at anywhere else, because if Canon wasn't releasing a new camera, I wasn't getting it, right? And that it was, as I think back to it, really held me back, because I could have switched to a camera that provided a little bit more of what I needed, but I was just kind of locked into my loyalty to Canon. But Canon wasn't loyal to me, right? It was just one of those cases where it's almost subconscious. You just kind of stick with what's familiar. You're just comfortable there. You're good there. So when I finally kind of hit the wall there in terms of what Canon was providing and couldn't provide, I wasn't going to spend $6,000 again to buy a Canon R3, another R3 to pair it up with my current R3. So that was really kind of the wall for me, because I was like, there's really nothing being done about the overheating. There's nothing being done about like the recording limits. There wasn't anything being done to help improve my experience with the Canon, but I was still being loyal to them for whatever reason. So it was just a mental shift for me to say, like, you know what? I'm open to looking at other brands. I'm open to looking at other options. And the fact that Lumix actually had another option that literally meets the needs that I have and does it very well, almost exceeds it, I was like, why not? You know, being willing to just make that shift and not give my loyalty to a company if they've stopped earning it. Right. So for me, Canon had stopped earning my loyalty because it just seemed like they weren't providing the things that I needed at the price point that made sense for me. I wasn't going to be spending $10,000 on a camera. Right. So being willing to do that, it's tough for creatives because we do get comfortable, we do get familiar with our equipment, and we do get very loyal to brands. But breaking that and just being willing to do it, being willing to explore and see what else is out there, that's such a huge thing. And honestly, for the A7S III users, I feel for you guys. You know, hopefully Sony does release an update or does show some. I don't even really care, because the A7S III is so loaded. It has so many features, so many functionalities that it's a phenomenal camera. Even if they don't release updates to add new functionality or whatever, even if they don't, it's still a rock solid camera. But there still has to be some semblance of Sony showing that they still care about the A7S III users and that they're willing to continue to support that line. And I don't know if they are. I don't know if they will. Only time will tell. So. But that's just was such an interesting thing for me to see, because I hadn't really been obviously I'm not a Sony shooter. I shot Sony in the past, but I hadn't really been following that. I hadn't really been following Sony and what was happening with the A7S III and the whole firmware updates until recently, especially when the ZV-E1 came out. It was like you could tell the new features, the AI features that are in there, like the new chip, like all these things. I'm like, the FX3 has it, FX30, even the literal, like the cheaper, which is kind of, I guess, more of the bigger gut punch, is that the ZV-E1 is like, what, $1,500 cheaper than the A7S III, but yet has all the latest features that Sony is rolling out. So it's almost like you paid a premium price, but you're not getting the premium support or premium service that you paid for. So that's just a wild thing for me. It's just the whole, we can't stay brand loyal if these brands aren't being loyal to us. If they're not willing to stick with us or, commit to continue supporting us, we have to be willing to go. And it's kind of wild because this, for me, kind of it tied me back to the whole idea of having gas, right? Now, I'm not talking about like farting or being bloated, not that kind of gas, right? It's called gear acquisition syndrome, right? If you're a photographer, if you're creative, if you do video, if you do anything where you use a camera, you have camera gear, and you know what it means to have that gear acquisition syndrome. It's that case where like having the newest, the latest and greatest is it, right? It's almost like when you have gas, when you're in that mode of just, I gotta get new gear, I gotta get the latest camera body that came out, I gotta get the latest lens that came out. You're constantly searching, constantly looking, constantly watching reviews. It's almost like you just got a new camera body, and then 2 months later, you haven't really even opened up the full capacity of that camera body. You're already looking at reviews for another camera body, or you're already looking at reviews to switch up this lens or switch up that. And it's like we're almost chasing gear to hopefully, and in a lot of senses, it's just almost like FOMO, right? It's almost more so like fear of missing out rather than actually focusing on getting gear that's going to help us do our job better, right? Now, there's nothing that's going to make you, like, no amount of gear is going to make you a better photographer or a better videographer. Gear, the tools, it's just it's equipment that'll make your life easier as a photographer or videographer. If you have, I'm not the person that's like, gear doesn't matter. It does matter. Gear does make a big difference. And But gear isn't the only difference. If you're just chasing gear and hoping that having the newest camera or the newest lens is what's going to take you to the next level as a photographer or videographer, then that's the wrong mindset, because you may have the newest and the latest, but if you haven't understood basics like composition and lighting, you're still going to have crappy footage. It's just going to be through a newer and better camera, right? You're still going to have crappy footage. It's just going to be through a newer and better lens, right? So the gear isn't really going to make you better at what you do. You have to develop those skills. It's almost like as you develop the skills, when the time comes where your skills have surpassed what your gear can provide you, when your skills are way beyond to where your gear is almost limiting what you can do, the creative things that you want to do, then that's a good time to look into getting new gear, upgrading, advancing, moving forward. But a lot of times when you have gas, or you're in that mode of gear acquisition syndrome, where you're just getting gear, it's like you don't really need it. You haven't really come to a point where you have to upgrade. You're just doing it because you want to at that point. It's like the delayed gratification is out the door. I just want this. I'm going to pay for it. I'm going to do it. And this is where we really get into trouble as creatives. Is gear acquisition syndrome leads to a lot of bad decisions. Now, this could be a lot of bad decisions financially, a lot of bad decisions in terms of jobs that we take, just a lot of bad decisions overall, because we're trying to accelerate a process that really doesn't need to be accelerated to that extent. So just something that got me thinking as we're talking about this, like the fact that they're not putting in the updates for the A7S III, that does suck, but it's also one of those things that Sony itself is almost in that mode of, it's like a reverse gas, right? It's almost like they're in the mode of getting new gear. It's like they're almost chasing the newest camera. They're chasing the next camera that they're going to release without slowing down to make sure they're taking care of those folks that helped them get there. Because I feel like, honestly, thinking back to it, I feel like the A7S III was really the camera in terms of video from my perspective. I could be off, but it's just from my perspective. I feel like that was when people really looked at Sony again, and they were like, okay, I think I'm gonna come to Sony. There was a ton of people that switched from Canon to Sony when the A7S III came out. Tons of people made that switch. It's almost like, for me, it was like the Lumix S5ii. It's what made me switch from Canon. Then the A7S III was that for a lot of people with Sony, and for Sony to almost kind of like overlook the buyers, the customers that helped them get where they are now. It just feels kind of sketchy. But it's almost like they have a gear acquisition syndrome in terms of creating new gear so that they continue to capitalize on the marketplace. So long talk on that one. It was just something that I really had in mind, and it's just to me, I don't know. That kind of stuff just bothers me sometimes. So, but anyway, that's all I wanted to cover in today's podcast, guys. Not gonna stretch this out super long. It's just had those ideas in mind. Kind of some of the stories that popped out to me as I was surfing the web, and the Google alerts that came into my phone. That's actually been such a handy thing for me. I really love having the alerts come in, because it's just a cool way for me to be able to get a snapshot of what's going on, what's happening, see if there's anything interesting or anything worth giving my attention to. A lot of times there isn't. A lot of times it's kind of like I don't feel like the Google alerts are 100% accurate. Sometimes I get news reports or newsletters that I'm like, this has nothing to do with what I want, right? So, but anywho, it's just fascinating to see. So yeah, so definitely glad to have the opportunity to lay down this podcast. Definitely pumped about the consistency, staying steady with this. I'm excited about the weekend. I'm gonna be heading out, catching a movie tonight, getting together with some of our guys and hanging out a little bit, and got an awesome shoot tomorrow, actually a wedding event tomorrow that we're going to be capturing and documenting, and just kind of kicking off an awesome weekend. So hope you guys have a great weekend. Enjoy your Saturday, enjoy your Sunday, get out there, have some fun, and we'll catch you guys on the next one. All right, see ya.